So I've been spending the last couple of weeks here railing about the Attorney General's settlement that's a sellout to the American people, and frankly quite concerned about all the statements contained within there. But that really was the side story. The real substance, and what I think is more disturbing than anything in that most disturbing agreement, comes in the form of the reports that were released by the Office of Inspector General on March 12, 2012. Now, the Attorney General settlement comes at the same time that I've been having real questions about why it is that in Pinellas County, none or virtually none of the properties that go through foreclosure are going to third parties. I couldn't understand why it was that in the state of Florida, in the county of Pinellas, when we have 3,000 foreclosure final judgments in the year 2011, such a small number, 436 or so, of those properties made it through the foreclosure process and onto the market. I think part of the explanation for that comes from the reports that were released on March 12th by the Office of Inspector General. Now, I want to focus for just a little bit on what's in front of me, which is the Bank of America report, but you'll note as you log on to the website that I'll provide here, there are detailed reports for most of the servicers. I believe all five of them anyway. There's Ally, City Mortgage, JP Morgan, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. But turning to the second from the bottom there, the Bank of America one, what's important to understand about this whole farce of a $25 billion settlement is to understand that we, the taxpayers, through the FHA, have paid billions of dollars to these banks for this entire process of foreclosure. Again, let's make that point very clear. As detailed in the Office of Inspector General reports, the taxpayers, through the FHA or America report here, it indicates on page 1 that during fiscal year 2009 and 2010, banks
submitted 36,095 FHA claims totaling $5 billion. The reason why it's significant is, again, this is not just about borrowers not paying their money or flawed or improper foreclosure practices. We're talking about billions of taxpayer dollars that are being sent to these banks and institutions who are engaging in improper practices and procedures. Now, throughout these summary audit reports, they dance around the fact that laws have been broken and, frankly, continue to be broken. But as you read these reports carefully, understand that when they say there are document irregularities, and specifically in each one of these where they acknowledge that notary practices were improper, we're talking about crimes. Violations of notary laws are crimes, and they're detailed in here, and yet that's just sort of danced away from without any significant commentary made on it. Now, another thing that I find so staggering about this is this rush to engage in a settlement agreement, in fact, to sign one, and the review period that is articulated here is very short, beginning in October 2010 and then concluding in January 2011. So we take 3 months to review these loans, and that's what we base all this decision making and the settlement amounts on. That's just absurd to me. But even more disturbing is the fact that articulated in this report is the fact that Bank of America limited the review that our own federal government was engaging in. So one of the problems that we all have with this agreement is we wonder just how bad were things really when we didn't have a full investigation. And on page 2, it quotes, "From the beginning of our review in October 2010, Bank of America limited our access to employees and information. Bank of America thwarted the efforts of the Department of Justice and others to obtain information that they needed to come up with real data about what was happening." Again, on page 4, "Our review was significantly hindered by Bank of America's reluctance to allow us to interview employees. When interviews were permitted, the presence or involvement of attorneys limited the effectiveness of those interviews." Bank of America refused to provide information that was demanded as part of subpoenas issued by the Office of Inspector General. As a result, it was not possible to know how much information Bank of America omitted that was relevant to our review. The Department of Justice issued effectively subpoenas to Bank of America wanting to talk to 34 current and former employees. Of those, 1 corporate representative and 16 former employees were able to testify.
But again, they document flawed and improper procedures throughout the foreclosure process and the review process. And again, we're talking about notary crimes. And then on page 6, Bank of America used a flawed process to submit FHA conveyance claims for judicially foreclosed upon properties and received FHA claim payments of more than $1.1 billion during the review period. Consider this in Florida, when Florida is one of the major states and, frankly, the major judicial states. Therefore, California would have been excluded from this, and the $1.1 billion figure that they're talking about is going to be primarily for Florida. Now, again, because Bank of America would not provide us written foreclosure policies and procedures, we relied on interviews. They were thwarted throughout the entire process from getting employee information. On page 8, it indicates that the 2 employees that did testify and raised concerns about notary process, management told them to ignore that stuff. Page 10, they have detailed information about law firms in here that were engaging in false processes. On page 10, it says that for one of the Bank of America notaries, he admits that over a 3-year period, he falsely acknowledged tens of thousands of mortgage assignments. Now, there's another very curious thing about this report on page 11, and that is they wanted to do an analysis of the top 10 law firms that were processing foreclosures for Bank of America. And the thing that I find so curious about this on page 11 is the table has indicated top 10 law firms that process Bank of America foreclosure documents, and it breaks it out by judicial and non-judicial states. I don't see any of the major players that did foreclosures primarily in Florida. I see one down at the bottom, but I don't see the big 2 or 3 that were the targets of the investigations of Florida's Attorney General. So look carefully at this website. It's the Housing and Urban Development Office of Inspector General. I'll have the link on there. But I encourage everyone to go in detail to each of these audits and just ask simple questions. How in the world is it that with all this information, these detailed facts in here, we would ever allow a $25 billion settlement to occur when it doesn't seem like much review at all was given? Again, looking at, they did a sample size of the loans in the buybacks of FHA, and in this thing, I'm looking at the, I guess this is the Wells Fargo one, and of this, they have 113 loans that they reviewed, and that's all. How in the world is it that they can come up with, and they claim that it's statistically significant to come up with all those, but given the problems they identified in that small statistical sample, how it is that they're able to come up with a settlement figure that means anything is just absurd. The settlement has got to be rejected based on the failure to collect good information or to do much investigation at all. But frankly, the information that is revealed in here is far more troubling in the long run and might get to the heart of one of those questions, why it is that so few properties are making it onto the real market. And I believe it's because you and I as taxpayers are paying through the FHA process on these foreclosures. It's absurd, and far more investigation needs to occur of all these figures.